but anyway, I'll tell you about one of my classic rodeo stories. When I used to have a real good little bulldogging horse. In fact, I used him at the Cody Night Rodeo in '68 and '69, and entered every night. And I don't think there were 6 steers in the 2 years I didn't catch off of him. But he developed a cough after the rodeo ended, the night rodeo ended, and I was entered in Matisse in the dogging. So I took him into the vet. The vet gave him a shot of penicillin and got it in his bloodstream and killed him. And it was really a shocker to us. But I tried getting mounted, riding other people's horses, wasn't getting along very good. So I basically gave up bulldogging for about a year. But when Billings came around, they had a lot of money added, and I knew there'd be a lot of bulldoggers there and a lot of good horses I could get on. So I went ahead and entered it. And there I hadn't bulldogged for over a year. Well, I got to thinking a pretty dumb thing to do because I wasn't in practice, and it was going to cost me $40 up and back when $40 was worth something to enter. So I was going to draw out, but I didn't get around to drawing out in time, so I was automatically in. Well, they had 139 bulldoggers entered, and during the week, this was during the fair, everybody got one steer, and then they took the final, the 15 best times back for the short goal. Well, I came out on my first steer. I got on a yellow horse that I'd ridden before and do a fairly good steer, and I came out and threw him in 6-something. Well, that wound up splitting third and fourth in the long goal, and that made me qualified me for the short goal. And I came back in the short goal and drew a steer that I'd been hoping all week I wouldn't draw. It had come out and set up real hard, and that's a good way to lose some teeth. So I got on a horse from Helena. I'd never ridden him before, but I'd seen him go several times, and told my hazer, I said, when I even get close, you start hollering at me to get down. And I came out and caught that bugger just perfect, brought him around and threw him in 4 something, and that won the short go and the average for me. Plus I won third in the long go in the calf roper and fifth in the average. And I wound up winning over $1,800, which would be about like 18,000 now. But my wife really gave me a lot of static when we went up take my first steer, went up my Volkswagen. She said, boy, we're real cowboys going to a rodeo in a Volkswagen. So coming home that night, I said, yeah, we're real cowboys, all right. And had to rub it in a little. But my dad was there, and he about flew out of the stand when I did that. And he'd always detested my rodeoing and fought me. But the next day he was on me to loan him some money, which I did, but I never did get it back. But that's one of the chances you take. And then when I was in the 2nd grade, this is another one of my classics. When I was in the 2nd grade in school, the teacher would always read to us for about 20 minutes or a half hour after the bell rang at noon. And she got a hold of this book. It was called The White Indian Boy. It was a true story about a boy that had came across the plains with the pioneers, and they settled on a ranch or a farm out there at Grantsville, just out of Salt Lake. They were having a lot of trouble with the Indians, and they decided to try working them. And they had to feed them anyway, so they were going to try to get some work out of them. Well, his dad had hired an old Goshute Indian to help him, and he had a little boy about this Nick Wilson's age, and he put him to herding sheep together. They were having a good time. And after about a year, the little Indian boy got sick and died. But this Nick Wilson had learned the Goshute language by then, and then he had to herd those sheep by himself, and he wasn't liking it very good, and pretty lonely. And along towards in August, there's a band of Shoshone Indians came and camped by where he was herding sheep, and they got to talking to him, found out he could speak their language, so they were getting quite a kick out of him, and then they started bringing this little pinto pony around and got him to ride it. They took turns leading it to start with, and they got him where he could ride it himself, and he brought it back one day, and they asked him if he wanted to keep it. He said he'd rather have it than anything in the world, so he said, well, they told him, if you'll come and live with us, you can have it. And he said, oh, I couldn't do that. And they said, oh, our papooses don't have to work. They just ride ponies and hunt rabbits and save chickens with their bow and arrows and don't have to do any work. And he asked them, he said, well, what do you have to eat? And they said, oh, we have all kinds of dried meat, fresh meat, berries, and it sounded a lot better than what they were living on back in the valley at the time. So he talked it over with this old Goshute Indian that was working for him, and he said, yeah, they'll take care of you. So he told him he would go, and he was about 12 years old, and he took off, and what had happened with Chief Washaki's mother had lost two boys in a snowslide, and she had a dream one night that one of them came back and he was white, so that made her thinking she wanted a white boy. And then when these Indians found this white boy that could speak the language, they decided it was a boy for the chief's mother, and they were going to kidnap him, but Washiki wouldn't let him do that. She said, but if you can bribe him, it'd be okay. So they told him they'd give him this pony if he'd come with them, and he took off and lived with them for 2 years and had some mighty interesting experiences. And then when the Utah War started, word got back to Washiki that they were getting ready to come after the boy. So he had him go home, and then he got to riding the Pony Express, driving the Overland Stage. He guided the army when they went and massacred the Indians that were burning the stations and killing the riders. And he just had they got him to go help him go after the outlaws that were raiding the ranges and whatnot. And it was really, but like I say, we was in the 2nd grade, and she was reading this book. And we were out there one day after the bell rang, and we were dragging our feet, seeing how long we could take getting back to class. And then somebody said, oh, she's reading the White Indian Boy. And man, we took off like somebody hit us in the butt with a hot shot. And anyway, after she got done reading it, I went up and bought a copy of it up at the store. It cost me $2.75, which was a lot of money for me back then, but I wanted it so bad I managed it. And I read it about every winter, and then I kept loaning it out. And I loaned it to a couple up in Billings, and they got a divorce, and I lost the book. I knew I'd never get another one. It was kind of a collector's item by now, but we took Camille down to the mission home. I went into that bookstore on Temple Square to see if I could get another one. And they brought me this one. It was called The White Indian Boy and the Return of the White Indian. He still had a boy. This Nick Wilson still had a boy alive. He was living over here at Story, Wyoming, over by Sheridan. And he'd published the original manuscript that this Nick Wilson had written. And then he told about the rest of his dad's life and a lot of that Jackson whole history. And it was a big old thick hardbound book, and I got to looking through it, and I thought, boy, they'll probably want $20 for this. I looked on the back, and they had a price tag of 47 something on it, so I just laid it down, went back and picked it up, and read a little, laid it down. I wasn't going to spend that much for a book. And after about the fourth reading, I just grit my teeth and went over and handed it. Cost me 49 something by the time they put the tax on it. But the only time I regretted was getting it was when I had to lay down the nearly $50. But I read it, and I had a job over by Story, so when I was over there, I looked his boy up, this Charlie Wilson, and talked to him, and they just got a bunch of these books off the press, and they were hurting for money pretty bad. So they asked me if I could help sell some, and I just starved to death years ago if I had to make my living as a salesman. I can't sell a $10 bill for $5, so I didn't want to tell them no, but I didn't think I'd sell any, and finally I said, well, I'll see what I can do. So they sent me about 7 or 8 home with me. They were only getting $32.50 for them, but I'd shoot a lot of horses at the time, and I'd get to talking about the book when I was shoeing, and within a week I had all 7 of them sold. I went back and they sent 15 home with me, and I sold all of them. But like I say, I was only getting $32.50. I wasn't making anything. And then they sent me home with a whole case, and I wound up selling all of them. And about that time, I called the Western Horseman magazine to see if they would put a write-up in their magazine. It's the top horse magazine in the country. And I talked to this guy. He said, well, I'm coming up that way next week. I'll stop in and interview him and get a copy of it. Well, I was over there shoeing a horse for him when the guy from the Western Horseman magazine showed up. And we got to talking. I got to tell him about this little mule I had. It was the best animal I ever owned, with just a little mule weighing about maybe 600 pounds. And I hate to tell people what I did with him because they wouldn't believe me anyway, but you could do everything but ride him, and there wasn't anybody got him rode. But so we just let him buck kids all over the country off. And he said, you know, I'm coming to Cody next week. I'd like to look at him. So when he called me, I hauled him up to the rodeo grounds, and we got the mule to buck a bunch of kids off. And he interviewed me, and I showed him, we led him around, roped his heels, and then I showed him pictures of him packing elk and sheep out. I packed game out a place I never would have taken a horse with him, and just turn him loose, and he'd be there when we got where we wanted to be. Well, anyway, when he left, he said, well, I can't really be very optimistic. He said, we get a lot of requests to put articles in. We can't put them all in. And I said, well, if it's one of the two, I'd rather you put one in on the White Indian Boy, because I said that's the best reading people can get a hold of as far as I'm concerned, and it's all horses or mostly all horses anyway. He said, well, I'll see what I can do. So I went hunting. I came back about 3 weeks later. I went hunting for about 6 weeks. And when I got back, they called me from the Western Horseman and wanted my address. He wanted to send me an article, a copy of the article they were putting in on my little mule. And he said, we're putting it in the October issue, and then we're putting the write-up on the White Indian Boy in the December issue. And they did. They really put a good write-up on it. And they told me later they literally sold hundreds of books all over the world just from that article. And there, I didn't think I'd sell a one. I wound up selling hundreds of them. But it was an interesting experience for me. Now, do you want me to shut up or keep going? Or
You can continue. You were going to talk about the bulldogging and then one of your best hunting, your favorite hunting story.
Okay. I guided big game hunters for 50 years, and that was probably the number one thing I did that I made a lot of money and had a lot of experiences. But when I'd take hunters out on my own, I'd try to only take two at a time. And there were a lot of trips we got two big bulls, but we never got two big ones in one day. Well, here about 10 years ago now, Casey had some friends from Missouri wanting to come hunting. There was four of them. And I told them I'd been up this Wood River hanging bear pools for the Forest Service and saw several nice bulls, so I had them put in for that area. I didn't think they'd draw, and I was almost praying they wouldn't. But anyway, they all drew, and then they all wanted to come at once. And so we wound up taking a load of grub and horse cubes in, and then come back and got the hunters. And I took one opening morning, and Casey took the other one. And they both got big old 6-point bulls. We took the other two with us that evening to pack them in, and they both got big 6-point bulls. So we got 4 big 6-points in one day. And then they sent another guy out, and 3 days later, and he got a real nice one up North Fork. So I got them all on a picture because I didn't expect anybody to believe me. But what was interesting, when they took the heads into the taxidermist to get them caped, the taxidermist asked them who they'd been out with. They said Carl Jones. The taxidermist said, okay, let me tell you about your trip. You didn't eat, you didn't sleep, but he worked your butt off. And they couldn't argue with him. And then when they took the meat into the meat processor, he says, I can always tell when Carl Jones sends meat in, you tell it's been bucked off about 3 times. So I was gaining quite a reputation. So, is that enough for one night?
It's up to you however long you want to go for. We currently have about 9 people watching, which is about the amount we had when we started. Now we have 10.
But these same hunters came back about 3 years later. And I said, the ones that got the big bulls opening day, I said, I don't expect that kind of luck this year. And 3 of the 4 got bigger bulls the second year opening day than they did the first. So they're going to be awful hard to please if they get out to where they don't see the elk. And the other one got a nice big bull the afternoon of either the second or third day, so they all went home with big bulls. But when we had to get those elk out up there before the grizzly bears found them. And when we went up Wood River, boy, we had every horse and mule. We could we couldn't even bring a duffel bag out. We had to go back in and get all the stuff after we got the hunters and the meat out. So that's probably enough for.
We just got a message from
From
Carly Turner. She said, "Howard, keep going. I'm enjoying everything, every single moment of this live."
Oh,
So
well,
she's wanting us to continue.
I'll tell one foster boy story and then I'll shut up. But we had this kid from Cody. He really gave his mom a bunch of static, and we got him, and he was really thought he was the toughest guy going. Around his friends, he really acted tough, and I got him up on the mountain at the by himself, and he started bawling on me. And I asked him what the problem was, and he said, "Carl, why didn't you tell me I had to stay here for 6 months?" I said, "God, I didn't know." I started bawling right along with him. They said they could hear me a half mile down the fence, and he found out I could bawl a lot louder than he could. And then he started issuing some vulgarities at me, and I said, "Fella, you apparently like it here." I said, "We're going to be going back to court, and the judge is going to go around and ask everybody their opinion, and I'm going to tell it to him just like it is." Well, he thought about it, and we had him for another 3 weeks. Didn't give us any more trouble, so we go back to court, and the judge goes around and asks everybody their opinion, and I told it to him just like it was. He told the kid, he said, "Okay, I'm going to let you go home, but you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that, you're going to do this, you're going to do that." And he said, "If you get out timeline one time, you're going to be back with the Joneses." I guess that was a big enough threat. They didn't have any more problem, but we've had over 150 foster boys through our home, and we've had parents that think we can walk on water and parents wanting to spit in our face. A lot of parents, after we've had them 6 weeks or so, then all their problems are our fault. But this guy's mom wrote us as nice a letter as you ever read, saying that we done more to adjust his attitude in 6 weeks than she'd been able to do in 16 years.
And about what year and month was this time you had that issue with that foster kid?
The one I just told about?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know. It was probably close to 15, 20 years ago. I don't.
Okay.
But, he sure found out I could bawl a lot louder than he could.
Is there any tips or suggestions you would give any of the younger parents that might be watching?
Well, I did. I asked the judge, Ed Webster up in Cody, I said, if you had to put your finger on the number one problem these boys were having, what would it be? And he said, the parents. And I asked Mark Lynn, he was a law enforcement officer in here at the school. I said, if you had to put your finger on the number one problem these kids were having, what would it be? He said, the parents. And he said, I asked a gal from building a fence for. Had worked for the social services down in Green River. Asked her the same exact question. She said the parents, but they, like I say, we have them for 6 weeks, and then their problems are all our fault. I've got to where when people call me and want me to take their boy and work them, I just flat tell them, I said, okay, I will, but if I pay them and what I pay them is going to be up to me. They don't have to start, but if they do, they are not to quit under any circumstance. And they'll agree with me, but the kid will go home whining and crying, and they'll meet me at the door when they go to pick you up and say, no, we're not going to send him back. So that's.
What would you say you've done differently with the kids than most parents have done? And if a parent has any issues, what would you suggest them to do that these other parents lacked in?
Well, send them here. My goal is to make them appreciate a good job when they get it, and they're appreciate their home, and we're generally quite successful. But we can't. We've got to have the parents behind us, or it's not going to work. And then a lot of the kids, as soon as they find out they have to work, they tell me they're sick. They're sick. They're sick. So we'll go stop downtown and get something on our way home to get something to eat at the cafe, and I'll say, well, if you're sick, you stay out here. I don't want to feed you just to have you throw it up. And they say, oh, I'm okay now. So they just try to use every excuse they can to get out of work. I had one kid, his dad wanted me to work him, and I worked him for a couple of weeks, and his dad came out to have a chat with me. He says, Steven says you're getting to bed late. We were working the night rodeo in Cody, and then they were working the fence up at Matisse. And he says, Steven said you're getting to bed late and then getting up early, and I'm a little concerned about this. I said, yeah, but did he tell you we're taking a nap in the middle of the afternoon? He said, no, he didn't say anything about that. And he says you're not eating very good. You're just eating out of sacks from the grocery store. I said, he's right, but he tell you we go to the Bonanza every night. That was a smorgasbord they had up there at Cody for quite a while. No, he didn't say anything about that. So he went home crying, telling his dad about everything bad he could, but he didn't tell him anything good. So I just loaded him up and hauled him home, and he's had nothing but problems ever since. So that's where we're coming from. That's probably
Agreed.
so.
And about what time would you suggest these people to tune in tomorrow?
I don't know. Probably the same time. So not